Picture this. It's 2:30 a.m. at one of the most heavily guarded palaces in Europe. Security cameras scan every corner. Motion sensors cover every pathway, and royal guards patrol with military precision. This isn't just any building. It's home to one of the world's most protected families. Nothing gets in or out without permission. Nothing ever goes wrong here, until tonight. A single figure moves through shadows that shouldn't exist, past cameras that should see everything, toward gates that have never been breached. In his pocket lies a piece of paper that could change everything, not just for him, but for an entire kingdom. The royal guard who spots him has no idea he's about to uncover a secret that the palace has spent years trying to hide. What you're about to read isn't fiction. This really happened. The young man caught at those gates? He wasn't just anyone. He was Prince Louis, third in line to the throne. And that note? It contained words that would shake the very foundations of royal tradition. Some stories are too incredible to be made up. This is one of them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Kensington Palace as Prince Louis Alexander Windsor stared out of his bedroom window. At 19, he possessed the kind of restless energy that palace walls couldn't contain, though they certainly tried. His reflection in the ancient glass showed a young man who looked nothing like the polished prince the public expected. Disheveled brown hair, tired eyes, and a jawline set in permanent defiance. 3 floors below, gardeners trimmed hedges with mathematical precision, while security personnel disguised as maintenance workers patrolled the grounds. Everything at the palace operated like clockwork, including Louis's life. Wake at 7, breakfast at 8, tutoring sessions until noon, public appearances in the afternoon, dinner at 7, and lights out by 10. Every minute accounted for, every movement monitored, every decision made by someone else. Your Royal Highness, your morning briefing begins in 15 minutes. Announced Margaret Thornfield, his private secretary, as she entered without knocking. She was a woman in her 50s with steel-grey hair and the kind of efficient demeanor that suggested she could organize a military campaign before lunch. In her hands, she carried the familiar leather portfolio that contained his daily schedule. Louis didn't turn from the window. What's on the agenda today, Margaret? More ribbon cuttings? Perhaps another charity luncheon where I smile and nod while someone explains poverty to me from behind a champagne glass? Margaret's expression didn't change. She'd grown accustomed to the prince's sarcasm over the past 3 years. The Children's Hospital visit at 10, followed by the opening of the new community centre in East London. Your afternoon is reserved for preparation for next week's steak dinner. Preparation? Louis repeated, finally turning around. You mean standing in a room while someone else picks out my clothes and tells me what to say? He walked to his desk where a stack of briefing papers waited. Each document was marked with the royal seal and contained carefully crafted talking points for his public appearances. Your Royal Highness, these events serve an important purpose, Margaret began. But Louis held up his hand. I know the speech, Margaret. The royal family serves the people, and every public appearance strengthens the bond between the monarchy and the citizens.
Did I get it right? His voice carried a bitter edge that made Margaret shift uncomfortably.
The truth was, Louis had been questioning everything lately. The previous month, during a visit to a homeless shelter, he'd met a boy named James, who was only 2 years younger than him. James had been living on the streets for 6 months after aging out of the foster care system. While Louis talked to him, he realized that James knew more about real life, about struggle and survival, than Louis had learned in 19 years of palace education. That encounter had planted a seed of doubt that grew stronger each day. What was the point of being a prince if he couldn't actually help people? What good was his title if every interaction was scripted? Every emotion rehearsed, every genuine moment carefully managed by a team of advisors. Margaret gathered the briefing papers and tucked them back into her portfolio. The car will be ready in 30 minutes, Your Royal Highness. Please ensure you're wearing the navy suit. It photographs well against the hospital's exterior. After she left, Louis sat heavily on his bed and pulled out his phone. Social media was officially discouraged for working royals, but he maintained a secret account under a false name. He scrolled through posts from young people his age. University students studying abroad, artists pursuing their passions, activists fighting for causes they believed in. Their lives seemed to overflow with possibility and choice, 2 things that felt increasingly foreign to him. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he called, expecting Margaret's return. Instead, his younger sister, Princess Charlotte, entered. At 16, she possessed the same restless energy as Louis, but had learned to channel it more diplomatically. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a casual sweater, a luxury only available during their private time. "You look like someone stole your favorite horse," she said, settling into the chair by his desk. "Maybe they did," Louis replied. "Maybe they stole something more important than that." Charlotte studied her brother's face. She'd noticed changes in him over the past few months, a distance in his eyes during public events, a reluctance to participate in family discussions about royal duties. "Want to talk about it?" Louis considered telling her everything. About the growing feeling that he was living someone else's life. About the dreams he'd been having where he walked through London as just another person, invisible and free. About the letter he'd written and hidden in his desk drawer, a letter that contained thoughts he'd never spoken aloud. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like?" he asked instead. "To just be normal?" Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I remember that normal people don't get to visit children's hospitals and actually make them smile. Normal people don't get to meet world leaders and influence policy. Normal people don't have the platform we have. But what if that platform is just an illusion?" Louis stood and began pacing. "What if we're just figureheads, Charlotte? What if everything we do is just theater designed to make people feel better about inequality while changing nothing substantial?" "That's not true, Louis. Look at the environmental initiatives William has championed. Look at the mental health awareness campaigns. Real change happens through our work. Does it, though? Or do people just feel like change is happening because we're talking about it?" Louis stopped pacing and looked directly at his sister. "When was the last time you made a real decision about your own life? Not what to wear or what to say, but something that actually mattered." Charlotte didn't have an answer. The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Their conversation was interrupted by another knock. This time it was Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Davies, head of Royal Protection. She was a woman in her early 40s with short blonde hair and the kind of alert eyes that missed nothing. She'd been protecting the royal family for over a decade and had a reputation for being both discreet and absolutely uncompromising when it came to security. "Your Royal Highness, we need to discuss some security updates for today's engagements," she said, though her expression suggested this was about more than routine protocols.
What kind of updates? Louis asked.
"Intelligence services have identified some increased chatter on social media regarding today's hospital visit. Nothing specific, but we're implementing additional precautions." She paused, studying Louis carefully. "We're also reviewing access to all royal family communications and movements. There have been some irregularities in the security logs." Louis felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of irregularities? Unexplained gaps in surveillance footage, minor discrepancies in access card usage, small things that individually mean nothing but collectively suggest someone has been moving through the palace outside normal protocols." Charlotte looked between her brother and the detective. "You think someone has been sneaking around?" "We're investigating all possibilities," Davies replied diplomatically. "In the meantime, everyone will need to be more conscious of their movements and report anything unusual." After Davies left, Charlotte turned to her brother. "Louis, you didn't." "Didn't what?" "You know what I mean. Please tell me you haven't been doing anything stupid." Louis forced a smile. "When have I ever done anything stupid?" Charlotte's expression made it clear she could think of several examples, but she didn't press the issue. After she left, Louis returned to his desk and opened the bottom drawer. Hidden beneath a stack of official correspondence was the letter he'd written 3 days ago. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded it and read the words he'd poured onto paper in the middle of a sleepless night. The letter was addressed to no one and everyone. It contained his thoughts about duty versus authenticity, about service versus self-determination, about the prison that luxury could become. Most importantly, it contained a decision he'd been afraid to make until now. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Tonight, everything would change. Tonight, he would finally take control of his own story. But first, he had to get through one more day of being the perfect prince. He straightened his tie, practiced his public smile in the mirror, and prepared to play his role. In 12 hours, when the palace was quiet and the guards were following their predictable patterns, he would put his plan into motion. The irony wasn't lost on him that his greatest act of rebellion would require all the skills his royal education had taught him: patience, planning, and the ability to hide his true feelings behind a mask of composed serenity. For once, his training would serve his own purposes rather than the institution's. As he walked toward the door to begin another day of perfectly orchestrated public service, Louis touched the letter in his pocket and allowed himself a small, genuine smile. Freedom, he had learned, wasn't something that would be given to him. It was something he would have to take. The black Range Rover glided through London traffic with the kind of smooth efficiency that only royal motorcades achieved. Louis sat in the back seat, watching ordinary people going about their ordinary lives through bulletproof glass. A businessman hurried past with coffee in one hand and his phone in the other. A mother pushed a stroller while juggling shopping bags. A group of university students laughed at something on a laptop screen as they sat outside a cafe. Each scene felt like looking into another world, one where people made spontaneous decisions, where conversations weren't scripted, where mistakes were allowed and authenticity was valued over image. Louis pressed his hand against the window, feeling the barrier between him and the life he craved. "We'll arrive at the hospital in approximately 8 minutes, Your Royal Highness," announced Detective Davies from the front passenger seat. "The children's ward has been cleared of media except for the official photographer. You'll meet with Dr. Sarah Chen first, then visit 4 specific patients. The entire visit is scheduled for 45 minutes. Louis nodded automatically. 45 minutes. Enough time to take photos that would appear in tomorrow's papers with headlines about the caring young prince. Not enough time for any real connection or meaningful conversation. The wizard would check a box on someone's public relations checklist, generate positive coverage for the monarchy, and accomplish absolutely nothing substantial. "What about the children who aren't on the list?" Louis asked. "I'm sorry, Your Royal Highness. The 4 patients I'm meeting, what about all the other children in the hospital? The ones who won't get a royal visit?" Davies exchanged a glance with the driver. "The schedule has been carefully planned to maximize impact while maintaining security, sir. The selected patients represent different areas of the hospital's work." "Maximize impact," Louis repeated softly. Even his attempts at compassion had been optimized for public relations value. The hospital came into view, its modern glass exterior gleaming in the autumn sunlight. A small crowd had gathered behind barriers on the sidewalk, some holding homemade signs, others simply hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty. Police officers stood at regular intervals, and Louis could see the subtle positioning of additional security personnel. Sarah Chen waited at the hospital's main entrance, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the slightly tired expression of someone who spent her days fighting to save children's lives. Behind her stood a carefully selected group of hospital administrators, all wearing their best smiles and newest suits. Louis stepped out of the car and immediately felt the familiar weight of performance settling over him. His shoulders straightened, his expression arranged itself into the practiced combination of warmth and dignity, and his pace shifted to the measured walk he'd been taught for public appearances. "Dr. Chen, it's wonderful to meet you," he said, extending his hand with the perfect amount of firmness and warmth. "Your Royal Highness, welcome to St. Mary's Children's Hospital. We're honored by your visit." Her smile was genuine, which made Louis feel even more like a fraud. As they walked through the hospital corridors, Dr. Chen began explaining the facility's work. "We treat over 15,000 children annually, many from families who travel hours to reach us. Our pediatric cancer unit has achieved some remarkable success rates in recent years." Louis listened, but his attention was divided. Through open doorways, he caught glimpses of the real hospital, children connected to machines, parents sleeping in uncomfortable chairs, medical staff moving with urgent purpose. This was where actual healing happened, in rooms that wouldn't appear in any official photographs. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Chen continued, "our first visit is with Emma Patterson. She's 7 years old and has been battling leukemia for 8 months. She specifically requested to meet you after seeing your photograph in a magazine." They entered a bright room where a small girl with a bald head and enormous blue eyes sat propped up in bed. Despite her obvious illness, her face lit up when she saw Louis, and for a moment, his practiced composure cracked. "Are you really a prince?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Louis sat in the chair beside her bed, forgetting the photographer's positioning instructions. "I really am, but I'm not nearly as interesting as you are. Dr. Chen tells me you're one of the bravest patients she's ever met." For the next 10 minutes, Louis found himself in the most genuine conversation he'd had in weeks. Emma told him about her drawings, her pet hamster named Sir Whiskers, and her plans to become a doctor when she grew up. She asked him if living in a palace was scary at night and whether he ever got to slide down the banisters. "Sometimes I pretend I'm a princess," Emma confided. "But I think I'd rather be a doctor princess who could make sick children better with magic." "I think you'd be excellent at that," Louis replied, and meant it completely. When it was time to move to the next patient, Louis felt genuine reluctance. He wanted to keep talking to Emma, to learn more about her artwork, to somehow bottle her resilience and carry it with him. Instead, he had to follow the schedule. The remaining visits followed the same pattern: brief, supervised interactions with carefully selected patients, while photographers captured images that would be distributed to media outlets worldwide. Each child was remarkable in their own way, and each conversation felt truncated by the demands of the schedule. During the final photo opportunity in the hospital's main lobby, Louis noticed a commotion down the hall. A young boy, perhaps 9 or 10, had slipped away from his room and was approaching the group. He walked with difficulty, leaning heavily on a walker, but his determination was evident. "Tommy, you need to return to your room immediately," a nurse called out, hurrying after him. "I just wanted to see the prince." The boy called back, his voice carrying a slight speech impediment.
"I wrote him a letter, but I don't know how to send it." Detective Davies moved to intervene, but Louis held up his hand. "It's all right."
He walked over to Tommy, ignoring the photographer's attempts to position the shot and the administrator's worried expressions.
"What's in your letter, Tommy?" The boy reached into his pajama pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper covered in careful handwriting. "I wrote about how the hospital needs more money for the children's ward. Some kids can't get treatment because there's no room, and some families can't afford to stay in London while their children are sick. I thought maybe since you're a prince, you could fix it." Louis took the letter and read it silently. Tommy had written with the kind of clarity that adults often lacked, outlining specific problems and suggesting practical solutions. His handwriting was shaky, but his logic was sound. "This is a very good letter, Tommy. You've identified real problems that need real solutions. Can you fix them?" Tommy asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the lobby waited for Lewis's response. The administrators hoping for a diplomatic non-answer, the security team calculating the time implications, the photographer ready to capture whatever moment emerged. "I can try," Lewis said finally. "But change takes time, and sometimes it requires more than one person." Tommy nodded seriously. "My dad says that's why people need to work together."
Your dad is very wise. As they prepare to leave the hospital, Dr.
Chen walked with Louis towards the exit. "Your Royal Highness, I hope you understand that visits like this truly do matter to our patients and staff. The children you met today will remember this for the rest of their lives." Louis stopped walking. "Doctor Chen, can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course. What would help this hospital more? Royal visits that generate publicity, or sustained funding that allows you to expand your capacity?" Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment, clearly weighing her response carefully. "Both serve important purposes, Your Royal Highness. Publicity helps raise awareness and can lead to donations. But you're right that consistent, substantial funding would allow us to help more children. What if there was a way to do both more effectively? I'm not sure I understand." Lewis looked back toward the children's ward, thinking of Emma's dreams of being a doctor princess and Tommy's letter about systemic problems. What if royal visits were less about photo opportunities and more about understanding the actual challenges you face? What if we spent time learning about the real issues instead of just being shown the highlights? Dr. Chen's expression shifted to one of genuine interest. "That would be quite different from the usual protocol."
"Different isn't always bad," Lewis replied.
During the drive back to the palace, Lewis stared out the window again, but this time he wasn't seeing a world he couldn't join. He was seeing problems he could help solve, if he could figure out how to break free from the constraints of traditional royal duty. Tommy's letter, carefully folded in his jacket pocket alongside his own, felt like a calling. Margaret was waiting when they returned to Kensington Palace, her leather portfolio ready with updates and schedule adjustments. "Your Royal Highness, your afternoon appointment has been moved 15 minutes earlier to accommodate a call with the Lord Chamberlain's office. They want to discuss next week's state dinner preparations." Louis nodded but barely heard her. His mind was working through the possibilities. What if he could use his position not just to bring attention to problems, but to actually solve them? What if the platform Charlotte had talked about could become something more than just a stage for performance? That afternoon's meetings passed in a blur of details about protocols, seating arrangements, and ceremonial procedures. Louis participated automatically, his responses drawing on years of training while his thoughts remained focused on Emma's infectious optimism and Tommy's practical solutions. As evening approached and the palace settled into its familiar rhythms, Louis felt the weight of the letter in his pocket grow heavier. His plan for that night had begun as an act of rebellion, a dramatic gesture of independence, but his conversations at the hospital had transformed it into something else. Not just an escape from his current life, but a step toward a better way of living it. The irony struck him that his most rebellious act might actually be the most royal thing he'd ever done, putting service above self, even if it meant challenging the very institution that had shaped him. As he prepared for dinner with his family, Louis realized that freedom and duty didn't have to be opposites. Sometimes the most powerful act of freedom was choosing your own version of service. But first, he had to get through one more royal dinner. One more evening of careful conversation and practiced civility. In a few hours, when the palace was quiet and the guards were following their predictable routines, he would begin to find out whether courage was something you were born with or something you could choose to develop. The grandfather clock in the palace's main corridor chimed midnight, its deep bronze notes echoing through empty hallways that had witnessed centuries of royal secrets. Louis lay fully clothed on top of his bed, staring at the ornate ceiling that had become as familiar as a prison cell. For the past 2 hours, he had listened to the palace settling into its nighttime routine, footsteps growing fewer and more distant, doors closing with soft finality, the subtle shift in energy that marked the transition from public space to private fortress. He knew the security schedule by heart. Growing up in the palace meant learning its rhythms as naturally as breathing. The external perimeter guards changed shifts at 11:30 p.m. and 3:30 a.m. The internal corridor patrols followed a precise 20-minute cycle, with predictable gaps that occurred during the shift transitions. The security cameras operated on a rotation system that created brief blind spots, originally designed to prevent guards from becoming complacent, but now serving Louis's purposes. At 12:15 a.m., he slipped off his bed and moved to the window. The palace grounds stretched out below him, bathed in the amber glow of security lighting. He could see 2 guards moving along the perimeter wall, their flashlight beams sweeping methodically across the manicured lawns. In the distance, the lights of London twinkled like fallen stars, a reminder of the world beyond the palace gates. Louis had been planning this night for 3 weeks, ever since his encounter with James at the homeless shelter had triggered his growing sense of disconnection. He'd studied the security protocols, memorized the guard rotations, and identified the route that would take him from his bedroom to the palace gates with the minimum chance of detection. But tonight felt different than when he'd first conceived the plan. Tonight wasn't just about escape, it was about beginning a journey toward authenticity. He pulled on a dark hoodie and black jeans, clothes he'd purchased secretly during a rare, unsupervised shopping trip months earlier. His usual wardrobe of tailored suits and formal wear would mark him as royalty even in darkness. These clothes would help him blend into London's nighttime landscape, assuming he made it that far. The letter in his pocket had evolved over the past 3 days. Originally, it had been a confession of his desire to abandon royal life entirely. But his conversations with Emma and Tommy had shifted his perspective. The letter now contained something more complex, a vision for a different kind of royal service, one that prioritized substance over symbolism, action over appearance. Louis checked his watch, 12:22 a.m. The next guard rotation would begin in 8 minutes, creating a brief window when the corridor outside his room would be unmonitored. He moved to his door and listened carefully. The palace at night had its own soundtrack. The distant hum of security systems, the settling of ancient timbers, the whisper of air through corridors that had been designed for horse-drawn carriages rather than modern climate control. At exactly 12:30 a.m., he opened his door and stepped into the hallway. The corridor was dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting long shadows that provided natural concealment. Louis moved with the careful precision of someone who had studied every creaking floorboard and loose carpet edge. His years of formal training in deportment and movement, originally intended to create perfect public appearances, now served a very different purpose. The palace's layout worked in his favor. His bedroom was located in the private family wing, which connected to the main corridor system through a series of service passages originally built for staff movement. These passages were less heavily monitored, designed during an era when the primary security concern was keeping people out, rather than keeping royals in. Louis paused at each intersection, listening for footsteps and checking for the telltale glow of flashlights. The security team was professional and thorough, but they followed predictable patterns. Their focus was on external threats, the possibility of intruders, not the reality of a prince trying to escape. As he moved through the palace, Louis found himself noticing details he'd never observed before. The portraits lining the corridors weren't just decoration. They were a gallery of his ancestors, men and women who had shaped the monarchy over centuries. Some had been innovators who pushed boundaries. Others had been traditionalists who maintained stability. Looking at their painted faces in the dim emergency lighting, Louis wondered which category he would ultimately join. The service passage led to the palace's main kitchen complex, a vast space that during the day bustled with staff preparing meals for the royal family and their guests. At night, it was empty except for the hum of industrial refrigerators and the occasional settling of metal cooling after a day of use. Louis moved through the kitchen like a ghost, using the large preparation islands as cover while he navigated toward the rear exit. The door to the service yard was equipped with an electronic lock that required a security card. Louis had solved this problem weeks earlier by observing the lock mechanism during legitimate visits to the kitchen. The system was sophisticated but not perfect. It relied on magnetic strips that could be duplicated with the right equipment. During a school technology project the previous month, Louis had learned enough about magnetic encoding to create a simple duplicator using parts ordered online and delivered to a friend's address. The lock clicked softly as his copied card was accepted. Louis felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with guilt. He was using skills and resources that his royal education had provided to actively work against the institution that had provided them. The irony was lost on him, that his rebellion required the very privileges he was trying to escape. The service yard opened onto the palace's internal courtyard system, a maze of smaller spaces designed to allow staff and supplies to move through the complex without interfering with the formal areas. Louis knew this territory well from childhood games of hide-and-seek with Charlotte and their cousins. What had once been playground was now his route to freedom. The main challenge lay ahead, crossing the central courtyard to reach the gate complex. This area was more heavily monitored, with overlapping camera coverage and regular guard patrols. Louis crouched behind a maintenance shed and studied the patterns of light and shadow. The security lighting was designed to eliminate hiding places, but it also created predictable zones of visibility and concealment. At 12:47 a.m., he made his move. The guard patrol had just completed its circuit and wouldn't return for 18 minutes. Louis sprinted across the open courtyard, using a decorative fountain as an intermediate stopping point. The sound of water cascading over stone masked any noise from his footsteps. He pressed himself against the fountain's base and checked his watch. 13 minutes until the next patrol. The palace gates were visible now, massive iron structures that separated the royal residence from the London streets beyond. During the day, these gates were crowded with tourists hoping for a glimpse of royalty. At night, they were barriers between two worlds. Louis pulled out his phone and sent a text message he'd composed earlier, taking control of my story. Don't worry about me. The message was addressed to Charlotte, though he wouldn't send it until he was safely beyond the palace grounds. She deserved to know that his disappearance wasn't impulsive or reckless, even if she wouldn't understand his reasoning. The final stretch required the most careful timing. The gate complex was monitored by both cameras and human guards with overlapping sightlines that made stealth nearly impossible. But Louis had identified a weakness in the system during his weeks of observation. The main gate cameras were positioned to watch for people trying to get in, not people trying to get out. Their angles created a narrow blind spot along the interior side of the gate structure. At 1:03 a.m., Louis left the safety of the fountain and began his approach to the gates. He moved in short bursts, timing his movement to coincide with the rotation of the automated camera system. The technology that was supposed to protect him was now the obstacle he had to overcome. He reached the gate structure and pressed himself against the iron framework. Beyond the metal bars, London stretched out like a promise. Streetlights illuminated empty sidewalks where normal people could walk without security escorts or predetermined routes. The city seemed to pulse with possibilities. Anonymous cafes where conversations weren't monitored, bookstores where reading choices weren't scrutinized, parks where solitude was possible. Louis reached into his pocket and touched the letter that had started this journey. Emma's drawings were in there too, folded carefully between the pages, stick figures of Dr. Princesses and brave children that represented more hope and authenticity than most of his official royal portraits. Tommy's letter was there as well, a reminder that real problems required real solutions, not just charitable photo opportunities. But as he stood at the threshold between his royal prison and his uncertain freedom, Louis realized that running away wouldn't solve the fundamental question that had been haunting him. The issue wasn't whether he could escape the monarchy, it was whether he could transform it. The children he'd met at the hospital didn't need a prince who disappeared into anonymity. They needed a prince who used his platform to fight for them. The letter in his pocket suddenly felt heavier. Instead of a farewell to his royal life, it could become something else. A manifesto for a new kind of royal service. Instead of escaping from his responsibilities, he could redefine them. Louis looked at his watch, 1:08 a.m. The guard patrol would return in 5 minutes. He had to make a choice. He could climb through the gate bars and disappear into London's night, becoming just another young man seeking his fortune in the city. Or he could return to his room and begin the harder work of changing the system from within. The decision crystallized in his mind with surprising clarity. Running away was a form of surrender. Staying and fighting for change was the truly radical act. The letter would still serve its purpose, but not as an explanation for his disappearance. Instead, it would become the foundation for a conversation about the future of the monarchy. As he turned to begin his journey back through the palace, Louis heard footsteps approaching. Someone was coming toward the gate complex ahead of schedule. His heart hammered as he realized he was trapped in the narrow space between the gate structure and the guard station with nowhere to hide. A powerful flashlight beam swept across the courtyard and stopped directly on him. "Your Royal Highness," called a familiar voice. "I think we need to talk." Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Davies lowered her flashlight and stepped into the pool of security lighting near the gate structure. She wasn't in uniform. Instead, she wore dark civilian clothes that suggested she'd been conducting her own covert surveillance. Her expression was unreadable, a combination of professional concern and something that might have been understanding. "How long have you known?" Louis asked, his voice steady despite his racing pulse. "About tonight specifically, since you left your room 23 minutes ago." Davies moved closer, her posture relaxed but alert. "About your general pattern of restlessness. Approximately 6 weeks." Louis felt a mixture of relief and embarrassment. His carefully planned escape had been monitored from the beginning. The security irregularities you mentioned yesterday were real, but not caused by an external threat. Your nocturnal wanderings through the palace have been creating gaps in our surveillance logs. My team has been tracking movement patterns that suggested either a very sophisticated intruder or someone with intimate knowledge of our security protocols. Davies gestured toward a bench positioned near the gate structure, apparently placed there for exactly this type of conversation. "Shall we sit?" "We have approximately 12 minutes before the next patrol, and I believe this discussion requires more time than that." Louis followed her to the bench, his mind racing through implications. "Are you going to report this to my father?" "That depends entirely on what you plan to do next." Davies settled onto the bench and studied Louis carefully. "You're carrying something in your pocket that you've been protecting throughout your journey tonight. I assume it's important." Louis hesitated, then pulled out the letter. In the amber glow of the security lighting, the pages looked fragile and somehow more significant than they had in his room. "It's a letter I wrote. About the monarchy, about service, about finding a way to make a real difference instead of just going through the motions. May I?" Davies extended her hand. Louis handed over the letter, watching as the woman who had spent a decade protecting his family read his most private thoughts. Davies read slowly, her expression shifting from professional interest to genuine engagement. When she finished, she folded the pages carefully and handed them back. "This isn't what I expected," she said finally. "What did you expect?" A young man complaining about the restrictions of royal life. Self-pity dressed up as philosophical rebellion. Davies leaned back against the bench. "Instead, I found someone thinking seriously about how to evolve an institution while respecting its fundamental purpose." Louis stared at her. "You're not going to try to talk me out of it?" "Out of what? You've already abandoned your original plan. You were heading back to the palace when I intercepted you." Davies's slight smile suggested she'd been observing more than just his movement. "Something changed your mind between reaching the gate and my arrival. I realized that running away wouldn't solve anything. The problems I wrote about in that letter, they don't disappear because I disappear. If anything, my leaving would make them worse." Davies nodded approvingly. "That shows remarkable maturity. But recognition is only the first step. The question now is what you plan to do with this insight." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two unlikely conspirators planning revolution in the shadow of one of the world's most traditional institutions. Louis found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about the woman who had been protecting his family. Her official role was to keep them safe from external threats, but tonight she seemed more interested in protecting them from internal stagnation.
"Can I ask you something?" Louis said.
"Why are you here tonight? Why weren't you in bed like everyone else in the palace?" Davies considered her answer carefully. "Because I've been watching you struggle with questions that I struggled with myself years ago. Before I joined Royal Protection, I spent 5 years in military intelligence. I know what it feels like to serve an institution while questioning whether that service is making a real difference. How did you resolve it? By finding a way to serve more effectively. I transferred to Royal Protection because I believed the monarchy, properly executed, could be a force for positive change. But that requires people within the institution who are willing to challenge complacency and push for evolution." Louis looked at the letter in his hands. "You think what I've written here could actually lead to change?" "I think it could be the beginning of a conversation that needs to happen. But conversations require participants. You can't change the monarchy from the outside. You can only influence it from within." Davies checked her watch and stood up. "We should head back before the patrol returns. But first, I want you to consider something. What if your night wanderings weren't about escaping the palace? What if they were about exploring possibilities? I don't follow. You've been studying our security systems, learning about the palace infrastructure, observing the rhythms of institutional life. Those are valuable skills for someone who wants to understand how change happens in complex organizations. Davies began walking back toward the palace. The question is whether you'll use those skills to run away from challenges or to solve them. As they retraced Louis's route through the palace, Davies asked about his hospital visit that morning. Louis found himself describing Emma's artwork and Tommy's letter with an enthusiasm that surprised him. Detective listened with the kind of focused attention that suggested she understood the significance of these encounters. Those children saw something in you, Davies observed as they reached the service corridor. They weren't responding to your title or your public image. They were responding to your authentic interest in their situations, but what good is authentic interests if I can't actually help them? The system doesn't allow for real engagement, just ceremonial appearances. Who says the system can't change? Davies stopped walking and turned to face Louis directly. Your grandmother transformed royal service during her reign. Your father has redefined what it means to be an heir apparent. Why couldn't you reshape what it means to be a working royal? They had reached the kitchen complex, and Davies paused to disable the security alert on the service door.
I'm going to make you a proposition, she said.
Instead of planning escapes from your royal responsibilities, what if you started planning innovations within them? What do you mean? What if your next hospital visit lasted longer than 45 minutes? What if you spent time learning about the real challenges instead of just meeting pre-selected patients? What if you used your access to decision-makers to advocate for the solutions that children like Tommy have already identified? Louis felt something shift in his thinking. The administrators would never approve that kind of deviation from protocol. The administrators work for the monarchy, not the other way around. If you present a compelling vision for more effective royal service backed by clear reasoning and measurable outcomes, they'll have to take it seriously. They climbed the service stairs toward the family quarters, moving quietly through corridors that felt different now than they had during Louis's escape attempt. Instead of barriers to overcome, they seemed like pathways to explore. The palace wasn't just a prison, it was also a platform, a resource, a base of operations for someone determined to use royal privilege for authentic service. There's something else, Davies said as they reached the corridor outside Louis's room. Your sister has been asking questions about your recent behavior. She's concerned, and she's intelligent enough to figure out what's happening if you continue these midnight expeditions. Louis felt a pang of guilt. Charlotte had been his closest confidant throughout their childhood, and his secretiveness was creating distance between them. Should I tell her about tonight? That's your decision. But consider that she might be a valuable ally in whatever comes next. Change is easier when it's not a solo effort. Davies reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a sophisticated phone. This is an encrypted communication system. If you decide to move forward with implementing the ideas in your letter, you'll need a way to coordinate activities without going through official palace channels. Louis took the device, feeling its weight as both tool and responsibility. Why are you helping me? Because I've spent 10 years protecting a family I believe in, but I've also watched that family struggle to find relevant ways to serve a changing world. What you wrote in that letter suggests you understand both the value of the institution and the necessity of evolution. Davies checked her watch one final time. The patrol will be here in 90 seconds. I suggest you get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be more challenging than today. As Louis prepared to enter his room, Davies added quietly, Your Royal Highness, the courage you showed tonight wasn't in planning to leave. It was in choosing to stay and fight for something better. Louis closed his bedroom door and leaned against it, processing everything that had happened. The night had begun as an escape attempt and ended as something entirely different, a recruitment into his own revolution. The letter in his pocket no longer felt like a confession or a farewell. It felt like a battle plan. He moved to his desk and spread the pages out under his reading lamp. Emma's drawings and Tommy's letter were still folded between the pages, tangible reminders of why authentic service mattered. But now they were joined by new possibilities. The communication device Davies had given him, a sense of alliance with someone inside the palace structure, and most importantly, a clear understanding that change was possible. Louis began to write. Not another letter of frustration or escape, but a detailed proposal for transforming royal engagements from ceremonial appearances into substantive interventions. He outlined new approaches to hospital visits, community engagement strategies that prioritized listening over speaking, and methods for using royal access to connect problems with solutions. As dawn began to lighten the sky outside his window, Louis realized that his rebellion had taken an unexpected form. Instead of rejecting his royal identity, he was claiming it on his own terms. Instead of running away from responsibility, he was expanding its definition. The prince who had tried to escape the palace gates had evolved into someone determined to transform what those gates contained. The revolution would begin from within, and it would start with the next hospital visit. The morning sun streamed through Louis's bedroom windows with unusual intensity, as if the world itself had been transformed overnight. He had managed only 2 hours of sleep, but his mind was sharper and more focused than it had been in months. The papers spread across his desk, his original letter, Emma's drawings, Tommy's carefully written concerns, and his new proposal for reformed royal service created a roadmap for the most important conversation of his life. At precisely 7 o'clock, Margaret Thornfield knocked on his door with her usual punctuality. "Your Royal Highness, your morning briefing begins in 15 minutes. Today's schedule includes preparation for the state dinner, a fitting for your ceremonial uniform, and a call with the Commonwealth Youth Council." "Margaret," Louis said, not moving from his desk, "I need you to clear my morning schedule." She paused in her inventory of appointments, her efficiency momentarily disrupted. "I'm sorry, Your Royal Highness? Cancel everything until noon. I need to speak with my father, and it can't wait for a convenient appointment slot." Margaret's expression shifted from confusion to concern. In 3 years as Louise's private secretary, she had never heard him request a direct meeting with the Prince of Wales without going through proper channels.
Your Royal Highness, your father's schedule is quite full today.
"Perhaps I could arrange something for later this week." Louis stood and turned to face her fully. "Margaret, this isn't a request that can be postponed. Please contact my father's office and tell them it's urgent." Something in his tone made Margaret realize this wasn't typical royal restlessness. She gathered her portfolio and nodded. "I'll make the call immediately, Your Royal Highness." After she left, Louis showered and dressed with unusual care. Instead of his typical casual morning attire, he chose a formal suit that conveyed seriousness without ostentation. Today's conversation would determine whether his midnight revelation could become reality or would remain an idealistic fantasy. His phone buzzed with a message from the encrypted device Davies had given him. "Meeting arranged for 9 a.m. in your father's private study. Charlotte will be present," she insisted after learning something significant was happening. "Good luck." Louis felt a mixture of relief and nervousness about Charlotte's involvement. His sister possessed an intuitive understanding of royal dynamics that often exceeded his own, but he wasn't sure how she would react to his plans for revolutionary change. At 5 minutes before 9, Louis walked through the palace corridors he had navigated so stealthily just hours earlier. In daylight, surrounded by the normal activity of palace life, the previous night's journey felt surreal. Staff members greeted him with the same respectful deference they always showed, unaware that the prince they were addressing had fundamentally changed overnight. His father's private study was located in the historical heart of the palace, a room lined with centuries of royal portraits and filled with furniture that had witnessed countless significant conversations. Prince William sat behind an oak desk that had belonged to his grandfather, studying documents that Louis assumed related to his upcoming royal engagements. Charlotte occupied a chair near the window, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes alert with curiosity. "Louis?" his father said, looking up from his papers.
Margaret indicated this meeting was urgent. "Is everything all right?"
Louis had rehearsed this moment during his brief sleep, but facing his father's concerned expression made his prepared words seem inadequate.
He pulled out his letter and placed it on the desk between them. "I need to share something with you, both of you. It's about my role as a working royal and my vision for how that role could evolve." William picked up the letter and began reading while Charlotte moved closer to read over his shoulder. Louis watched their expressions change as they processed his thoughts about authentic service, meaningful engagement, and the need for institutional evolution. The silence stretched for several minutes, broken only by the turning of pages and the distant sounds of palace life. When they finished reading, William set the letter down and studied his son's face. "This is quite thoughtful, Louis, but it reads like a manifesto for significant change. What prompted this level of philosophical examination?" Louis had decided during his preparation to be completely honest about his journey, including the previous night's escape attempt. He described his growing frustration with ceremonial duties, his encounters with Emma and Tommy at the hospital, and his realization that authentic service required more than traditional royal appearances. "Last night I tried to leave," he concluded. "I made it to the palace gates before I understood that running away wouldn't solve the fundamental problem. The institution needs to change, and it can only change from within. Charlotte had remained silent throughout his explanation, but now she leaned forward in her chair. Louis, when you say you tried to leave, you mean you actually attempted to escape from the palace? I did. Detective Davies intercepted me at the gates and helped me understand that my energy would be better spent on transformation rather than escape.
William's expression had shifted from concern to something approaching admiration.
You're talking about fundamentally reimagining how we conduct royal engagements.
The administrative challenges alone would be enormous. But not impossible, Louis replied. What if we started with a pilot program? One hospital visit conducted according to the principles I've outlined, extended time, genuine engagement, focus on understanding problems rather than just creating positive publicity. Charlotte spoke up for the first time. The media would notice immediately if you deviated from standard protocol. They'd want to know why you were spending 3 hours at a hospital instead of 45 minutes. Good, Lewis said. Let them ask. Let them investigate whether deeper engagement produces better outcomes than surface-level appearances. William stood and walked to the window that overlooked the palace gardens. Your proposal essentially argues that we should prioritize substance over symbolism. That's not necessarily wrong, but it represents a significant shift in how we've approached royal duties for generations. Grandmother evolved royal service during her reign. You've redefined what it means to be an heir apparent. Why couldn't we reshape what it means to be a working royal in the 21st century? The risks are significant, William continued. If your new approach fails to generate the positive coverage that traditional engagements provide, it could damage the monarchy's public standing.
But what if it succeeds?
Charlotte interjected, and Louis realized she was beginning to understand his vision. What if genuine engagement creates more meaningful connections with the public than ceremonial appearances? Louis pulled out Emma's drawings and Tommy's letter, spreading them on the desk alongside his proposal. These children didn't respond to my title or my public image. They responded to my authentic interest in their situations. What if that authenticity could become the foundation for a new kind of royal service? William returned to his desk and picked up Tommy's letter, reading the 9-year-old's clear analysis of hospital funding challenges. This boy has identified systemic problems that require legislative and policy interventions. Traditional royal protocol prevents us from advocating for specific political solutions. What if our role wasn't to advocate for specific solutions, but to ensure that the right people are having the right conversations? Louis asked. What if we used our access to connect problem solvers with decision makers? Charlotte was studying Emma's drawings of Dr. Princesses. There's something powerful about these images. They suggest that children see possibilities that adults have forgotten, that helping and leading can be the same thing. The conversation continued for over an hour, with William challenging various aspects of Louis's proposal while Charlotte helped refine the practical details. Gradually, what had begun as one young man's revolutionary manifesto evolved into a family discussion about institutional evolution. If we were to attempt something like this, William said finally, it would need to be carefully planned and strategically implemented. One failed experiment could set back progressive royal initiatives for years. Does that mean you're willing to consider it? Louis asked. I'm willing to help you develop a more detailed proposal, one that addresses the administrative, security, and media challenges you haven't fully considered. William paused. But Louis, this can't be about rebellion for its own sake. It has to be about genuine service. It is about genuine service. That's exactly what it's about. Charlotte gathered Emma's drawings and studied them again. What if we started with something smaller than a complete hospital visit redesign? What if we created opportunities for young royals to spend extended time learning about specific issues without the pressure of immediate public scrutiny? William nodded approvingly. A kind of royal fellowship program. Intensive education followed by informed engagement. Exactly, Louis said, feeling excitement build as his individual vision became a collaborative plan. We could spend weeks learning about healthcare challenges, education inequities, environmental issues, whatever areas we want to focus on, before making any public appearances. The meeting ended with an agreement to develop a detailed proposal over the next 2 weeks. William would consult with senior advisors about the practical feasibility of Louis's ideas, while Charlotte would research how other royal families had successfully evolved their service models. Louis would work with Davies to address security and logistical considerations. As they prepared to leave the study, Charlotte touched her brother's arm. Louis, what you attempted last night was incredibly dangerous, but what you've proposed this morning might be even more dangerous, and much more important. Walking back to his room, Louis felt the weight of possibility. The letter that had begun as an expression of frustration had become the foundation for a new approach to royal service. The prince who had tried to escape his responsibilities was now working to expand them. His phone buzzed with a message from Davies. Palace administrator wants to meet this afternoon to discuss irregular security patterns. Time to put your communication skills to work. Louis smiled and replied, let's give them something really irregular to think about. The revolution had officially begun, and it was going to be fought with authenticity, innovation, and the kind of royal service that Emma and Tommy deserved. The palace gates that had merely witnessed his escape would instead become the launching point for a transformation that honored both tradition and progress. The morning sun continued to stream through his windows, illuminating the papers on his desk where his old life had ended and his new purpose had begun.